shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. What a fool you are.
Behave yourselves!
Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry Saravia at the Movies. So today we're taking a look at a film called Burden of Dreams by a documentary director named Les Blank. And this focuses on the making of a film shot in Peru, specifically the Peruvian jungle in northern Peru, near the border with Ecuador. And this was, the film was Fitzcarraldo, which starred Klaus Kinski in the title role, and was directed by Werner Herzog. Now, some of you may know this film, Burden of Dreams. It has been referenced a lot, particularly in The Simpsons, and in a film called Dangerous Game by Abel Ferrara. It is an anti-film. It is a reason not to make a movie. And we'll get to why in a second. Now, the story of Fitzcarraldo is based on an actual person, a would-be rubber baron. The actual person, I believe, was called Fitzcarraldo, if I'm not mistaken, Carlos Fitzcarraldo. And he was a Peruvian rubber baron. So Klaus Kinski plays this role, an Irishman in Peru known as Fitzcarraldo. And he wants to transport a steamship over a steep hill to access a rich rubber territory in the Amazon basin. So, it's based on these historic events and his real-life feat of transporting a disassembled steamboat over the Isthmus of Fitzcarraldo. Now, Herzog has always had troubled productions to a certain degree, but this one is probably the most troubling, because what happened was that he was shooting with the Aguaruna people, who are an indigenous people of this particular part of northern Peru, and many of them were hired as extras for the film and were also hired for construction, and they were paid actually double than they would be paid otherwise for whatever they for whatever jobs or anything they did as far as hard physical labor. And at one point, Herzog began the construction of a village on Aguaruna land, and he did not consult the tribal council before doing this, and also didn't obtain protection from the local militia when the tribe turned violent. So eventually the film set was burned down by the Aguaruna men. Now, the tribespeople had issues with Klaus Kinski. They didn't like him. Klaus Kinski was a madman on the set. Werner Herzog was no less of a madman. Maybe he showed a little more restraint, but those two did not get along. They usually didn't in most of the films they did, which was about 4 of them. 3 prior to this one. Wojciech was one, Aguirre, the Wrath of God, and Nosferatu. So, the issue was that Kinski wanted people to pay attention to him. Now, this is not covered in the film Burden of Dreams, actually. The whole Kinski debacle. Because a lot of the tribesmen wanted to kill Klaus Kinski. That's how bad it got. To the point that they even wanted to be hired to do so. And Herzog, I think, pretty much wanted to kill Klaus Kinski. I mean, he was a complete madman. Kinski. The film of Fitzcarraldo I still haven't quite seen yet. I do plan to, especially now that I've seen this documentary, which I've heard about for so long, and now I finally got around to seeing it. But the reason it's an anti-film, to me, is because it's basically saying, as he even says at one point, that maybe it's just not worth the risk to make a film. Now, in this day and age, we think about, for example, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible movies doing his own stunts. I mean, is it really worth it when you're, hanging onto a plane as it's taking off, or doing all sorts of crazy things like hanging, off of with just barely a cable attached to you on the tallest building in Saudi Arabia, I believe it was, in Ghost Protocol. That's not the same kind of risk. Here, the situation is that the steamship itself, which was 320 tons, they really were going to push it over this hill. And they finally did, but not with the help of the Agwarabuna people. Eventually, he hired somebody else, Herzog, and they got that steamship to go over the hill. So they were really doing it. So the difference between the movie Fitzcarraldo and the documentary is pretty slim, because Herzog became Fitzcarraldo. He was just as obsessed with this, and the point is it worth the risk? At one point there were a couple of deaths of the Agwarabuna people. The local tribe had fired arrows at them. I mean, it was just, it got really bad. And then there was a rainfall, of which they had many days and weeks of rainfall. They had 3 different ships that they had to work with. The conditions here were, it was out in the jungle, you know, and it's miles and miles of jungle, he says, as he points out. It's, you know, either you have 300, I think at one point he said it's either 1,000 miles one way, 350 another, 550 to walk this way. I mean, it was all jungle. And who knows what sort of insects and snakes and all sorts of things. Now, in the documentary My Best Fiend, which was directed by Werner Herzog, Burden of Dreams is not directed by Herzog, obviously, it's by Les Blank, covering this production. He talks about it. We see a lot of footage of Klaus Kinski and the situation that arose there. So, but is it really worth the risk, though, to do a film like this? This is a real passion project. You know, we don't see too many of those lately. I mean, sometimes they're shot with micro budgets nowadays. Most high concept Hollywood pictures, genres, are not passion projects. I mean, not really. But when it's very personal, as is in the case with Fitzcarraldo and this documentary, they become intertwined. But is it worth the risk, especially when Herzog was being accused of exploitation, when, you know, because he felt like he was Fitzcarraldo, like a god. And whether he admits to it or not, it's certainly very clear when you watch Burden of Dreams. I think he's empathetic towards the people. We discover from the documentary My Best Fiend that Klaus Kinski was less empathetic. But is it really worth it? And the answer is no. It's not. And even Herzog realizes it. Maybe, you know, you shouldn't spend all your time making films. Maybe just once in a while. So there's a very important moral to this story, despite the fact that the film was finally completed. But I can almost be sure that at some point Herzog probably even thought Fitzcarraldo would be the last film he ever made. Of course, that's not the case, and I think we could be thankful for that. But it really becomes a question of how far do you take things when you exploit a tribe? Are you exploiting them, or are you really trying to help them? And I think he tried to nurture them, he tried to help them. At one point they even hired some prostitutes to do some work. I mean, it was that kind of a production. Laborious, and even on the documentary director himself, Les Blank. So Burden of Dreams is an important documentary. It's just, I think it's essential to see it, and also Francis Ford Coppola's, which he didn't direct obviously, but the making of Apocalypse Now, called Hearts of Darkness, I believe. It was released back in 1991 or 2, and that focuses on the making of Apocalypse Now and how maddening that film was. And so both of these films deal with 2 complete madmen making movies and almost approximating the feeling of being a god. And that can be troublesome when you're dealing with an ethnic tribe in the middle of nowhere, where these people in Peru would probably never see another film production come down to their pike at all, ever. And even Herzog recognizes that. So that's kind of what I thought about it. I think it's a terrific movie, but it kind of makes you feel disturbed and wondering, is it really worth it? Is it worth the risk? So, those are my thoughts on Burden of Dreams from 1982, directed by Les Blank. And lend me your thoughts. Have you seen this film or similar documentaries about, particularly Hearts of Darkness, for example? Have you seen Werner Herzog's other films as well? What do you think about this? Do you think sometimes it's worth the risk to make something that is so arduous and difficult to do, and that can cost lives? And it obviously did, this film. So lend me your thoughts. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell for new videos that are being uploaded. That's all I've got to say about that. This is Jerry Saravia at the Movies, signing off.